all sorts of craziness, pathology, psychopathy because of not getting it. And the full manifestation of it on a social level, perhaps not individual but social, is the global village. The extreme version of it is, I am you, you are me. Herbert Mead's wet dream. I am who I am because of everyone. Well, that doesn't even make any sense. That's even self-contradictory. Fromm says, the majority of well-adapted individuals have lost their own self at an early age and replaced it completely with a social self offered to them by society. They have no neurotic conflicts because they themselves, and therefore the discrepancy between themselves and the outside world, have disappeared. What he's talking about there is that you've repressed the imperial self to such a degree that other kind of anxiety doesn't even happen anymore. The suppression and the repression have done their work. Now we learn to understand the significance of the voice hallucinations play, right? They play a distinct role in the symptomatology of certain psychotic disturbances, right? Psychotics talk about hearing voices. Those patients hear voices that speak to them in the third person and incessantly comment on and criticize their actions and failures to act. Freud traced those voices back to the parental criticism. The development of consciousness, the development of conscience is regressively reproduced by those patients who reproject the voices into the outer world from which they originally came. So the superego is on overdrive. The patient doesn't know what is happening. All it hears is, I'm a bad guy, I'm this, I'm lost. And then in order to balance that out, they believe they're Napoleon or Jesus Christ. They do that because they're so needing to quieten that voice by having some self-esteem that it's also out of control. The person is just overwhelmed by the inner dictator. Now, Vance Packard said that early in the 50s, Fortune magazine viewed the trend uneasily and used the Orwellian word groupthink to describe much of what was going on. It suggested that businessmen, while deploring creeping socialism in Washington, might well look at some of the subtle but pervasive changes going on right in their own backyard. Its writer, William H. White, Jr., stated, a very curious thing has been taking place in this country, almost without our knowing it. In a country where individualism, independence, and self-reliance was the watchword for 3 centuries, the view is now coming to be accepted that the individual himself has no meaning except as the member of a group. So it was instilled. It's by design. It's a hallmark of socialism. Jung says that the man of today who resembles more or less the collective ideal has made his heart into a den of murderers, as can easily be proved by the analysis of his unconscious, even though he himself is not in the least bit disturbed by it. We're knee-deep in these people. And as we know, inner sadism soon becomes external sadism. Now these leaders, they think of themselves as the buyers and sellers of human beings. In fact, Francis Bacon's term for them was the merchants of light. That's heavy. And they're just inventors of the new improved model. That's what their global village is all about. And you know what they know? They know that freedom itself is a very, very young phenomena. Remember I said before that they think, I'm not giving up my power because who replaces me will be just as bad as me. You're all the same, so why should I give it up? They also know that freedom, the freedom that everyone's crying about, they go, you must be crazy, that's about 5 minutes old. And do you know something? They're right. Eric Fromm explains, what characterizes medieval in contrast to modern society is its lack of individual freedom. Everybody in the earlier period was chained to his role in the social order. A man had little choice to move socially from one class to another. He was hardly able to move even geographically from one town or from one country to another. With few exceptions, he had to stay where he was born. He was often not even free to dress as he pleased or to eat what he liked. Medieval society did not deprive the individual of his freedom because the individual did not exist. So now the social individual did not exist. Sociologists accept that as being the individual is a recent invention, a recent phenomena. The Julian Jameses are saying, look, your thought of you being an individual is relatively young. And Big Brother thinks, yeah, and it's not good for you. We're going to take away what you have of it. Thomas Szasz says the birth of psychiatry occurs when the study of the human soul is transferred from religion to medicine, when the cure of souls becomes the treatment of mental diseases, and most importantly, when the repression of the heretic madman ceases to be within the jurisdiction of the priest and becomes the province of the psychiatrist. Oh, that nasty craving for freedom. We'll take care of that. It'll just plague you to death, that will. You know, Patrick McGowan's worst nightmare. Now, these spirits have usurped. This is one of the psychopaths who was one of these early psychologists who believed that these medical men, especially, were saints on earth. He actually called them saints and saviors. These spirits, he says, have usurped control over the earth, and that all those who are mentally disturbed have become so through their power. They have a common starting point, a main principle to which they are subordinated: selfishness. So in the earliest days, they believed that everyone who was deranged, everyone who had any aberrant characteristics, it was that devilish selfishness and individuality that was causing them to act that way, causing them all that disturbance. Well, we got to build. These architects built the madhouses, the bedlams, the untold suffering of millions. Innocent people, good people, artists, creative, sensitive geniuses were incarcerated because they had this bug called selfishness. This most evil of all evils, he says, is present in the most remote and even in the closest human relations. It is absorbed in the mother's milk and finds a fertile soil in the human heart. What kind of psychopath is this? If it's in the mother's milk, then leave it alone. The same monstrosities exist today with their new updated version of the global village, the gulag, the bedlam. It's my conviction that the human race, says Mikhail Gorbachev, has entered a stage where we are all dependent on each other. No other country or nation should be regarded in total separation from another, let alone pitted against another. That's what our communist vocabulary calls internationalism, and it means promoting universal human values. It's double speak. It's the erosion of all human values. More socialism, he says, means more democracy. There's that talismanic word. Openness and collectivism in everyday life. Hillary Clinton, an expert on the subject. We must stop thinking of the individual and start thinking about what's best for society. That's a classic. I'm already chills with the first word. You want to stop thinking about individuals? Start thinking about remember that? Think about the species, think about the collectives. We are you. They'll have headsets later. It'll be coming out of the speakers. We are you. I am everyone. And the mushroom heads get in on the game. You remember, they were in it at the beginning. Who can fail to see the need and importance of thus gradually coming to the establishment of a world authority capable of taking effective action on the judicial and political planes? Delegates to the international organizations, public officials, gentlemen of the press, teachers and educators, all of you must realize that you have your part to play in the construction of a new world order. This Jesuit Mason Rettinger co-founded the Bilderberg Group. Jesuit. Joseph Rettinger. Money from Prince Bernhard. Religion, royalty, crown and gown, double-headed eagle, cross and crown. Behind the desks and the lodge door, they're laughing at thinking we believe all the blue and green and the blue and red divisions of outside. They love it. Queen Beatrix, a Bilderberger Group member, she says, it is difficult, very, very difficult. They're recalcitrants. It's very difficult to re-educate people who have been brought up on nationalism to the idea of relinquishing part of their sovereignty to a supernatural body. We'll get round to it, but it's tough work. Remember that Tom Ridge quote during 9/11? Civil liberties is the most precious gift we bestow or we give our citizens. Remember that? The Pennsylvania governor. The man himself. He said, the sacrifice of personal existence. Now look at this. The sacrifice of personal existence is necessary to secure the preservation of the species. Robert Temple, in Open to Suggestion, a book I highly recommend, along with Gustave Le Bon's The Crowd. says that Hitler was a student of the crowd, the famous book by Gustave Le Bon, which founded crowd psychology. It is time we paid this subject more attention, as so many millions of people have died as a result of it. They have an ideology behind everything they're doing. The influence of repetition on crowds is comprehensible when the power is seen which it exercises on the most enlightened minds. This power, says Le Bon, is due to the fact that the repeated statement is embedded in the long run in those profound regions of our unconscious selves in which the motives of our actions are forged. At the end of a certain time, we have forgotten who is the author of the repeated assertion, and we finish by believing it. She's talking about embedded ideas. The global village, the iron cage of bureaucracy, the village, is basically, technically called a superorganism. That's what it is. Entities within that organism simply can't survive on their own if removed from it. That's the plan. It's been moving that way for generations. As I said, Michel Foucault called it total institution. Look that word up. He also referred to it as governmentality. Government, control of the mind. Gubernare, to row or to steer, to navigate, or to control the direction of something. Menta is mind. Now this superorganism is a product of the superego. That is, of our inner surveiller. We are always watched. We are always safe. We make our society the panopticon and become what Foucault referred to as docile bodies. We've already explained how that happens when you self-mutilate yourself. In effect, we are panopticonized. Are we not? Eric Fromm says the sick individual finds himself at home with other similarly sick individuals. The whole culture is geared to this kind of pathology. The result is that the average individual does not experience the separateness and isolation the fully schizophrenic person feels. Remember, the schizophrenic being the one who's tried to hang on to the last vestiges of what his imperial self has, under all the weight of his terribly torn mind. That's why they have the troubles they do. That's why they're in the state that they are. Remember that scene in Pink Floyd, The Wall, where after he just goes through the incredible rite of passage and he smashes up the hotel room, which is a metaphor for his mind. He slowly, methodically, piece by piece, picks up every broken shard and makes this amazing mandala of it all. Remember that scene? That is what the schizophrenic has to do, to be born again from the flames. Order out of disorder, a Zen action, creation out of destruction. But not everybody can do that, and sometimes it's quite impossible to do it. In the Psychovampirism, we're going to get detailed case histories, quotes from schizophrenics that will tell you about what goes on in their own minds and the hell that they've gone through in relationship to the authorities around them. And also how they were being categorized and shunted aside and restrained. Le Bon says that it's easy to prove how much the individual forming a part of a crowd differs from the isolated individual, but it is less easy to discover the causes of the difference. The most careful observation seems to prove that an individual immersed for some length of time in a crowd, in action, soon finds himself, either in consequence of the magnetic influence given out by a crowd, or some other cause of which we are ignorant, in a specific state which must resemble the state of fascination in which the hypnotized individual finds himself at the hands of the hypnotizer. So he's mesmerized, he's colonized, he's enthralled, enthralldom. It's also known as participation mystique, a primitive concept. M. Esther Harding says that the man caught up in such an identification loses his capacity to make an individual judgment. He relinquishes his autonomy and vests it for the time being in a group. Thus he is no longer in any real sense an individual. He is only a member of a group, identical in all respects with other members. What they do, he does. What they feel, he feels. What they think, he thinks. And what they ignore, he too ignores. It's like a form of reverse possession. But the man who's psychically little, right? The little man, the psychically little, he feels this largesse by hanging around a bunch of other, likewise, broken souls. Eric Newman speaks about the participation mystique. He says, so long as the ego was swimming in the belly of the Ouroboros, a mere ego germ, it shared in that paradisical perfection. This autocracy holds absolute sway in the womb, where unconscious existence is combined with absence of suffering. Everything is supplied of its own accord. There is no need for the slightest exertion not even an instinctive reaction, let alone the regulating ego consciousness. One's own being and the surrounding world, in this case, the mother's body, exists in a participation mystique never more to be attained in any environmental relationship. He's wrong. They're working on it. They know that. And they want to go back before the ego. Before the tiresome superego, they're going to do it all for you. They've got an injection ready, a pill waiting, a global village incarceration for you, into which we will walk. If we haven't got the imperial self on absolute max, we won't have any choice, because the crowd is heading in that direction. They're going to create that womb. Watch Demolition Man with Sylvester Stallone and other movies of that type. Equilibrium and so on. They're literally knowing that remember I said they know our psychology, they understand the libido, the sexual hang-ups, they understand history, they know where we've come from, they know that all these things are recent. They're working to create Mama, another great female womb, but a technical one, an artificial one. That's why a lot of the symbolism around this is water, female, feminine, statues of liberties, and God knows what else. Even the design of the malls and so on. Watch out for this female symbolism. Because they know that that's the lure. And if we don't know how to resist that lure, we're on the hook. Le Bon says that the conviction of crowds assumes those characteristics of blind submission, fierce intolerance, and the need of violent propaganda, which are inherent in the religious sentiment, and that is for this reason that it may be said that all their beliefs have a religious form, right? They're always shaking out with some mushroom head. The hero acclaimed by the crowd is a veritable god for that crowd. The crowd demands a god before everything else. That's another mysteria. And Louis Lapland says that no matter how effusive our rhetoric to the contrary, most Americans cannot bring themselves to trust the unaffiliated individual. We prefer to repose our confidence in institutions, a brand name, a corporation, a bank. It is the figure of Babbitt and Cyrus Vance, not Clint Eastwood, who represents the triumph of the American dream. George Simmel, the sociologist, practically the creator of sociology, he says that the deepest problems of modern life flow from the attempt of the individual to maintain his independence and individuality of his existence against the sovereign powers of society, against the weight of the historical heritage and the external culture and technique of life. The antagonism represents the most modern form of the conflict which primitive man must carry on with nature for his own bodily existence. So we haven't progressed anything at all. We're still working with the jungle, just in a different way. Fromm says that the vast majority of people in our culture are well adjusted because they've given up the battle for independence sooner and more radically than the neurotic person. They have accepted the judgment of the majority so completely that they've been spared the sharp pain of conflict which the neurotic person goes through. He's speaking about the positive neurosis of you trying to resist. Otherwise these quotes wouldn't be understandable unless we had laid that down. While they are healthy from the standpoint of adjustment, they are more sick than the neurotic person from the standpoint of the realization of their aims as human beings, the insanity of normalcy. Jung says that it is a notorious fact that the morality of the society as a whole is in inverse ratio to its size. For the greater the aggregation of individuals, the more the individual factors are blotted out, and with them morality, which rests entirely on the moral sense of the individual and the moral necessity for this. Hence, every man is, in a certain sense, unconsciously a worse man when he is in society or in a group than when acting alone. So these Queen Beatrixes and these slime, these Hillary Clintons, that's what they're working on. They want you to get rid of that individuality, knowing that the morality goes with it. They want that because they're immoral. But if you're equally immoral, then you can't blame them, you see. So their filth and their dirt and their crime, hey, is the kettle calling the pot black here? It's like any local criminal in court standing up there in the dock going, well, they stole from me, trying to mitigate his case. That's what they're doing. Jung goes on to say, for he is carried by society and to that extent relieved of his individual responsibility. Now you start seeing the true reasons why we go for it. Any large company composed of wholly admirable persons has the morality and intelligence of an unwieldy, stupid, and violent animal. The bigger the organization, the more unavoidable is its immorality and its blind stupidity. Go and ask the Icelandic people what happened to them. Go and now find out what this mob rule, this cliques how they can even do what they do, because one of our questions is, how can they do what they do? How can they sleep at night? Well, if there's no individuality there's no conscience to worry them. Fromm says that society is divided into two groups, of those seeking to break their mental and emotional coding and actualize selfhood, right? The imperial self and the legitimate anxiety crowd, and those seeking only to conform and sacrifice their identity to the many ideologies, lifestyles, and cults which proliferate, and which are designed to erase personal identity and reward collectivism. You try telling that to your parents in state, just by design. They're ready to send you to the cookie farm. But the top intellects have said it, written it down. Now those who conform, who remain within the relative comfort zone, who never aspire towards independence of thought or action, and who even suppress those who do, deeply hate themselves for their love of falseness, for their material attachments, and for their systematic weakness. Right? Now he's touching on where we're going later. The nerve of the self-hatred that's breeding, festering under people, especially these big boys at the top. This hatred must at times be vicariously processed. This is achieved in myriad fascinating ways. Age of Manipulation 3. We'll find out the fascinating ways of what he's talking about. The vicarious processing through you, through your field, through your consciousness, through your cells. And then you wonder why you're feeling depressed and unhealthy. And why life is so tough. While you're resting your head on the bosom of the one who's causing it all. The more severe manifestation of such violence is obviously war. So in other words, all the cacophony and chaos that you see, we know it's orchestrated, yes, but it's also a necessary vicarious processing of this inner Armageddon that's going on within. And when we get the solutions, we'll find out what to do about it. Now this surrender of one's own self has often been praised as the example of the great love. Look at my medals. It's actually it's a form of idolatry and also the annihilation of the self, except it's in physical terms. In war, they're just dying in the trenches. But that person is probably already psychically dead long time before. Their humanity and their sense of self has already been long killed off. What does it matter to them how many millions die? As Colin Powell said, it's just a statistic, I'm not interested in it. Now the drive is also rooted in a deep anxiety and an inability to stand alone, but instead of finding increased strength by being swallowed, strength and security are found in having a limited power over the other person. The masochistic as well as the sadistic kind of love are expression of one basic need which springs from a basic inability to be independent. And Arno Gruen puts it in succinct terms. He says a distorted development of autonomy is the root cause of all the pathological and ultimately evil element in human beings. They pick up the pieces, there's no doubt about it. You don't need politicians and religious leaders to lead you astray. He goes on to say the more love, this is Freud, the more love I turn towards the outside world, the less love I have for myself. People cringe when you say that. And vice versa. Freud is thus moved to describe the phenomenon of falling in love as an impoverishment of one's self-love, because all love is turned to an object outside of oneself. We are very young. We have a lot to learn. What is the point of loving somebody who doesn't love themselves? And do you really expect them to give you love if they have no clue how to love themselves? Keep doing it. In popular usage, says Rand, the word selfishness is a synonym of evil. Now she nails it. The image it conjures is of a murderous brute who tramples over piles of corpses to achieve his own ends, who cares for no living being and pursues nothing but the gratification of the mindless whims of any immediate moment. Yet the exact meaning and dictionary definition of the word selfishness is simply concern with one's own interests. Look how much erosion has taken place. She described us as living in an orgy of self-sacrifice. Now, this thing becomes important to understand because the collectivist mindset, and those who have embodied it that you'll be meeting, watch for this one. In their mind, the collectivist imagines that everything he thinks about and produces or creates or has an opinion on, but also produces and creates, is everyone's property. That's what Ayn Rand went to great lengths to show and dramatize, that everything I've got, the collectivist says, and everything I think about, that's everyone's property. Only trouble is they don't overemphasize the other side of that. Everything you think about, have an opinion on, and create is his property. It doesn't sound so good, does it? Everything you think about, everything you create, everything you do is everybody else's property. I thought that constituted rape. Rand goes on to say, a society that robs an individual of the product of his effort, or enslaves him, or attempts to limit the freedom of his mind, or compels him to act against his own rational judgment, a society that sets up a conflict between its edicts and its requirements of man's nature, is not strictly speaking a society, but a mob held together by institutionalized gang rule. Professor Charles Osgood and his colleague, Stuart Umpleby, they write, in the organization of a civilization of the future, we anticipate that the individualistically oriented man will become an anachronism. Indeed, he will be viewed as a threat to the group organization as well as to his fellow man. They're for it, by the way. Hence, as stated, he in all likelihood will have few individual expectations. While such a picture may not be pleasant to contemplate, we should be amiss to deal with unrealistic imageries that would blind us to the future reality. They can't wait, you see, they can't wait. Bertrand Russell said it this way, diet, injections, and injunctions will be combined from an early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. That's why I'm saying you now see us rebelling and creating blogs and all sorts of things and waving placards. You see, that might not even be happening tomorrow. That's why it's deeper. The perfect slave is being created. Hail the providers. You know, the French poet Charles Péguy said that tyranny is always better organized than freedom. Tyranny is always better organized than freedom. And if you're disorganized mentally and emotionally,